Getting the early numbers could be the key to success when betting on the NFL. That's why we're here to react to the pinnacle openers and analyse where the market might move. Welcome to the opening line. Hello and welcome to another episode of the opening line. Playoff football continues this weekend as we move on from the wild card round and on to the divisional matchups. With me once again are our three esteemed NFL betting experts. We've got Eric Eager, Andy Molitor and Rufus Peabody. Thanks for joining me again today, guys. And we'll get started with some key takeaways from the weekend. I know as we kind of talked as the season has gone on, playoff football, you probably haven't had as much action down. So maybe there hasn't been too much impact from a betting perspective. But if we go sort of round to each of you, maybe some tops and flops, some sort of who's impressed you the most and maybe who's disappointed. Andy, I'll start with you.
I mean, coaching in general probably disappointed me. Just the amount of times you saw Twitter just melt down over a punt. Like it used to be just a few analytics accounts, but just like melt, and now it just fills up like when some of this. So, I mean, that was we do it like Cheers. Remember Cheers and Jeers from TV Guide way back in the day? Like that would be my jeer. I was really down on coaching in general, and good coach. A lot of good coaches advanced. Weird. I don't understand how this works. So I was impressed with a couple of the teams, but nobody came and blew me away. Like the Browns were given some gifts. The Ravens struggled at times. And they're going to face another tough pass defense. Of all the teams that advanced, maybe the fact that the Rams scored 30 points maybe that was my highlight. That's a lot more than I projected them to score. I thought Seattle would be held lower than they were. That obviously one was a garbage touchdown. And probably my other takeaway was just how impressed Seattle was with themselves after this season. like you had a first round exit as a division champ in a game where you barely got the offense moving, and you were very excited because you scored the most points your franchise has ever scored and wasted another year of Russell Wilson's life. So I'm just baffled at how some teams judge themselves after season's end. I think that's what killed me this week.
Eric, over to you for your jeers and cheers, as Andy put it.
Well, I think Andy brings up a really good point about coaching. You look at the 8 that are left. I think the worst is Bruce Arians, who's probably a decent coach, probably median coach in the NFL at this point. You look, both the Bills and the Ravens are well constructed as far as, I think analytics, but also just the way their teams are built. That's going to be a great game. Tampa versus New Orleans is going to be a really good game, and both 1 seeds ended up, by virtue of of one upset, are going to end up with easier roads of it. Than we projected. So I don't know. I think we kind of lucked out as far as what happened, given that now I'm fairly certain that Baltimore-Buffalo is going to be a good game and Tampa-New Orleans is going to be a good game. Whereas, I think, we got some of the sort of like crappier teams to watch out of the playoffs in Pittsburgh and Seattle.
Last but not least, Rufus.
My biggest jeer, I guess, is going to go to Pittsburgh. We had some people over for dinner and I look up and it's like, first snap. I'm like, wait, what just happened? How did the Browns score a touchdown? And then, 20 minutes later, it's 28-0. And it was such an unusual game. And then obviously I don't like the coaching was just atrocious in certain situations. I think maybe Sean Payton got a little too much hate for his poor decision-making, simply because, I think he thought like the only way we lose this game right now with the way our defense is playing is if we somehow make if we keep them in it, make a mistake. And so I think he was potentially, I'm not saying it's the right move, but going with sort of the lower variance mindset there. Just knowing knowing that he is going to win that game essentially without making any big mistakes. But I'm supposed to come up with some cheers. Like it was what, 12, how many, I got to do some math, 18 hours of football, more than that, like 20 hours of football basically. So I basically was on my couch all weekend and it was fantastic.
Do you guys think that the Buffalo Indianapolis game played into the rest of the way the weekend was played? Because I feel like Indianapolis got skewered for going for that fourth down instead of, quote, taking the points when they were up 3 at the end of the first half, and then they went for 2 and didn't make it either. And the Cognicia was like, hey, if you get those points, you're ahead at the end of this game. When in reality, I think that what they did, which was to sort of shrink variance down in terms of decision making at the beginning of the game as opposed to the end of the game, was obviously really smart. But since they lost, maybe some of the teams in the league or around the rest of the league sort of like buttoned up a little bit.
That's the thing about decision making. It's the same as what we're doing with these games. Like if you want to be completely result oriented, you're gonna have a bad time looking back at things. You see that with like when Pete Carroll would go for a fourth down and not get it. In the next scenario, he kicks the field goal because he's results oriented. And that's what, like, when I think Pittsburgh had 2 punts that were questionable.
Awful.
And the one they pinned him, and Cleveland went 3 and out. And I'm like, that's the worst thing for Tomlin, is for that to work. Like the fact that it works, he's going to do it again. Like seeing those results flesh out in your advantage when you made a bad decision, rewarding a bad decision like that, it's the worst thing for your team later on in the game. Just, confirmation bias on your part.
And if you look at last year and the Ravens going for it, I mean, look at their success rate on fourth down. I think they missed 1 fourth down conversion all year back in the 2019 season. And so it was so easy for them to continue going for it. And people have been saying, why aren't they haven't, Eric, am I right in saying they haven't gone for it as much this season?
Yeah, they haven't been as successful, and they haven't gone as much. There have been a few cases where they didn't, although they did go that one time up 7, right? The pass interference. No, was it 4? I can't remember, but they had that.
There was the penalty. There was the offensive pass interference, and then they kicked the field goal.
Right. So there was the juxtaposition of the Titans punting on 4th and 2 from the Ravens 40, and then the Ravens driving the length of the field and going for it on 4th and 2, picking it up, but then getting it called back and having to kick a field goal in succession. It sort of showed the difference between those two franchises.
Well, maybe it was outcome bias in response to Justin Tucker missing a field goal. They were like, "Oh, this isn't automatic. Maybe the analytics says we should actually go for it. I should look, So
I'd be interested for you guys. Is it kind of just a hot topic at the moment? I mean, Andy, you hit the nail on the head with Twitter. You couldn't escape it over the weekend. The amount of prospective coaches, I think, out there sort of commenting on it. And I mean, me personally, I think I would just give a shout out to Matt Davidale, who does some great work on his feed and sort of the stuff he puts out from the deck prism model. It's not opinion based. I think he actually puts some tangible figures to it. But generally speaking, do you guys think, is it just because it's the playoffs? There's more sort of a magnifying glass on it, or has it really been an issue this season?
It's actually gotten better. I mean, people have done the stuff. I can't remember, is Michael Lopez from the League or Ben Baldwin from the Athletic have done and teams are going for more 4th and shorts. I think that when the playoffs come around, the spotlight is higher. There's also more. I mean, people are betting on sports more, right? People are a little bit more attuned to how much individual decisions matter, because it's like, if you're a sports bettor and you bet on a team to win or to cover, that's what you care about. If you're a fan and if you're a coach, frankly, your incentive structure might be different. You might want to stay engaged in the game longer. Well, sometimes that's at odds with actually winning the football game. In the case of the Titans punting, trying to pin a team deep, maybe that keeps, maybe you think, maybe as a coach or as a coach, I think what you want to do is, if you make a bunch of negative EV situations, but you make them in the same direction as everybody else, maybe you keep your job longer. That's the objective function for them. But for a fan, even who's not financially invested in a game, maybe it keeps your hopes up a little bit longer. Whereas you can see, sometimes people are afraid, for example, going for 2 at the end of, there's so much value people place on getting into overtime, when overtime is really just a coin flip, and in fact, a loaded one in the order of the favorite. So, I think sports betting has made it even more of a situation where people are questioning some of these long-standing decisions that people have made. But it's gotten better league wide. I just think this weekend it took a step back a little bit.
I think part of it is it has gotten a lot better over the last few years, and that's why certain decisions last weekend were so sort of alarming and egregiously, and why they were such hot topics, because we didn't really expect them, especially among playoff teams and coaches who are. Well, I'm not going to say anything about Pete Carroll, but Tomlin I consider to be. Well, I don't know if he uses analytics. Sometimes he does the aggressive thing when he shouldn't, but.
He's just throwing darts. Like sometimes it looks like he's being analytically, driven, but it's just he can be aggressive at times. Whereas like I had a little more, it hurt a little more to see Vrabel. And if you look at like the punt index, the punt cowardly index, or whatever it is, like that Vrabel one is in the 100th percentile. It said. I mean that was completely egregious. And to your point, it's like the. You do things according to how they've always been done. You do things according to common wisdom and how most of the league would react, and you're not looked at as making some huge mistake when the game is lost. Keep your job. They can't pin it down like, oh, you went for it on fourth, they went and scored, you lost the game. Like the mob will come for you on that, and the announcers don't help either. When people go for two down 14 late. And these announcers just have no idea. Like they're all smart enough men where you could show them the charts, spend 5 minutes with them, and explain how overtime works. But every week you hear these announcers just baffled by this stuff, and then you get the 15-year-old girl on Nickelodeon like, "Yeah, go for it."
I was going to say, we need to,
be aggressive.
Need to start getting coaches slimed for negative EV plays.
There's no coincidence that Chip Kelly, who was one of the more, he made a ton of mistakes, but he also did a lot of things that were, I think, against the grain. There's no coincidence that he was fired relatively quickly, right? I mean, he went 10-6, and then what was it, like 7-8 or 6-9 or something like that, and he was canned. The insular group that is the NFL, you bet if you go against the grain, you better be successful, right? And that was how influential the Eagles were in 2017 when they went for a bunch of fourth downs, but they made them. And how, to Rufus's point, of how the Ravens in influential situations last year went for fourth down and didn't make it. Like those, that's why people give us flack on Twitter for rooting for the outcomes. We're not rooting for the outcomes because the outcomes are what we're going after. We're rooting for the outcomes because if they don't happen, we're going to take steps back, and the game's not going to be as fun. So it's tough, and I do think that these things are not ergodic. Like they matter. The sequential aspect of these coaches' decisions matter to them way more than they do to us.
So taking that a step further, I mean, look at Doug Peterson getting fired. He went against the grain. He did something that I'm sure it wasn't his call. I think there was some pressure from the front office. He ends up being essentially the fall guy for this backlash against doing something that is in the best long-term interests of the franchise, at least from a wins and losses perspective. But Eric, you bring up something interesting too about how you think this analytics makes the game more fun to watch. Teams going for it, more or less kicking, which I think stands in contrast to what you see in baseball, where to me, sort of the analytics revolution makes the game much less watchable. Like strikeouts and walks and home runs aren't nearly. I mean, home runs are fun. Don't get me wrong, but I like watching bunts and defenses actually having to make plays and the ball being put in play more often. Like when you go to a game, it's a lot more fun to see the ball actually hit. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's down to narrative as well. And I think this idea of the coaching calls, it just adds another layer into it, doesn't it? It's something for people to, like we said, discuss on Twitter and whatever it might be. And perhaps we'll see more education around it. Andy's wish maybe of announcers kind of getting more information or being more educated about the impact these calls have. But one interesting question I had for you guys just before we move on to the sort of current playoff picture and stuff like that is we've chatted before, and I mentioned at the top of the show about maybe the amount of bets that are getting put down is probably been reduced, or it's becoming more difficult as we get into the playoffs now. For you guys, are you already looking ahead to something like next season? A lot of people listening to this will probably be moving on to the next sport that season kicks off or whatever it might be. But for people that invest so much time into it, what's it like for you currently? Can you enjoy the playoffs and the Super Bowl, or have you already got one eye on sort of next season and how to find advantage there?
I mean, most of my day today has been working on our models for the draft. That's not necessarily betting. I mean, there's props of, obviously that you can bet into for the draft, but it is, I mean, the football, like I sort of consider January part of the off season from my work perspective, just because you're not inundated with, as many games and as many things. That's a great question. I'm a fan of one of the teams that's still in there. So obviously I care about the games, but and obviously, we have to bet on them and produce content and stuff, but it is like there isn't as much value on the board there. I think most of the money from people is probably being bet. No, most of the bets, not most of the money. Most of the bets are probably on things like props now, as opposed to sides and totals.
Yeah, the props, that's a good segue into kind of what I was going to say, that the markets are fairly tight. It's hard to find a ton of value on these. I mean, the price discovery was done 2 months ago, and now we haven't even leased, even less of an edge on a lot of these. There are some injuries. You're going to have to track injuries, especially Cleveland and LA have some big injuries that you have to kind of manage, and maybe you can get ahead of some things if you have some information. But the prop markets are much more robust in the playoffs. You can find some soft stuff there if you look around. But like Eric's point, I love the NFL. I'm going to handicap these games. I'm going to do a bunch of stuff for them. We're going to still do our podcast and everything, but I'm not, going to be worried if I don't have any bets this weekend outside of some props and maybe filling up my Tampa Bay teaser. It's golf season. You got Sony this weekend, so it's time to move on to that. You got college basketball, and pretty soon there'll be other stuff even.
We had a nice segue into Andy. I think that's a nice segue into Rufus, a discussion around golf.
Yeah, I mean, that's my weekly process, although my weekly process is basically the same regarding golf every week, except for like 2 weeks in December where there isn't golf. So, because you still have the European tour. So it's basically the same. I was, working on getting down stuff this morning, sending some stuff to my guy over close to where you are, Ben. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, like NFL is more window dressing. I mean, it's sort of, it's the meat and potatoes. It's the entree. It's, I don't know, whatever. This is an awful metaphor here, but for most people, and I love watching the NFL and I love watching college football too. But at the same time, I know that's not, it's not the most efficient use of my time to really spend a lot of time on it.
All right, well, let's get back to the here and now and what is going on this season. Before we do get into the matchups, a quick maybe look at sort of where we're at in terms of futures. Obviously, 8 teams left in it. I guess the question would be if you could hit reset now and sort of look at the list that we've got for the outrights. Is there anything there that sort of jumps out to you as a team that might be undervalued or people are overestimating their chances? Is anyone still got any live tickets that they're kind of watching along with interest? What's the situation for you guys in terms of futures?
I have a lot of Green Bay. I thought that they were a little bit undervalued last week, and also early. I mean, like they were like 26-1 or something after week 1. When I think, a lot of skepticism. Going into the season, the Packers weren't even the favorite in many places. They might have been a favorite in some places like Pinnacle, but there were a lot of places where they weren't even the favorite to win their own division. And after week 1, you could still get them at something like 26-1 to win the Super Bowl. So that I have a decent amount of Green Bay, as much as it kills me being from Minnesota. But the weird thing is now I feel like their path is maybe, I don't know, you guys can back me up on this. I think their path is maybe a little harder now, the way that things shook out this past weekend. But I have a little bit there. Obviously, Kansas City, I think, had value early, but not for the last 8 weeks or so. And I think Tampa Bay has a little bit of value going into this week.
So I have futures liability, and actually maybe not coincidentally it overlaps with my Calcutta liability, but I have Saints futures from early in the season. I have Rams to win their conference, and I think just conference, and I have a little bit of Bills to win the conference from back in October. And I'm just trying to pull up Pinnacle numbers. I had a discussion with David Dow actually this week about the Saints. He and I have differing opinions on the Saints. Like, I ran my Sims, and I make basically the Saints the second most likely team to win the Super Bowl. And he's, I have him like 21%, and I know that's like quote wrong. I mean, I know that's not okay. That's not the number I would use going into a Calcutta. I would book action based on that. Yada yada yada. That's what the model says. The models obviously has its weaknesses, but I was able to get a 7-1 actually right now, and he's convinced. He thinks I do better parlaying the money line 3 straight weeks than 7-1, and I kind of disagree there. But and I'd be interested to hear your guys' take there on what you think the line would be. So what the line would be against Green Bay next week if they play Green Bay or the Rams, if that's the case. Assuming
you're talking about the Saints?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's their money line today? Like, what are they, minus 175 this week?
-3. See, so it's -3 juiced. Like what, 61% or so, no vig?
Yeah.
Yeah, minus 165 on Pinnacle.
It's so goofy trying to do this. I do this all the time with tennis outrights when you're looking at this with different tournaments, and it's so tough because you got to look at like there is like a worst case scenario where it's like, oh, the Browns made the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden you really wish you had that 7-1, or I'm not sure who the lowest. I'm guessing that would probably be the lowest in out of the AFC. But if they face Green Bay and Kansas City, it's probably close. Or I'd have to look at
what's the price against Green Bay? Like,
yeah, so if you assume, let's say you if you tried the money line rollover and they're, let's say, 3-point underdogs, well, in both in
like 1.5.
Yeah, but I mean, they have to be basically one. I'm trying to do the math right here. 165 or more, minus plus one, make it 160 or more in both of the subsequent games to make the rollover make sense. Which there are a ton of, like, how many sample paths is it where they win but they come out of it looking worse? Like, I think that only really happens in the case of like Kansas City, right? Where let's say they beat the Browns by like 3 points, then maybe they're cheaper on the money line the following week than they otherwise would be. But like for New Orleans to win this,
they'd have to have an injury.
Yeah,
point you don't want it.
Yeah,
and if Breeze gets injured, then they might still be a better team.
Yeah. But if you assume that they're minus 165 this week and then plus 150 against Green Bay, which seems a little steep, but let's go with it, and then plus 150 to Kansas City in the Super Bowl, let's say, then you're still only getting plus 600 at more or less, right? So
no, that's like plus 900.
Is it? Am I making an error?
2.5
yes,
times 2.5. What's decimal on?
Yeah, you're right. I made a miscalculation. Yeah,
I have 9.96% if you're so plus 904 if you're going minus 165 plus 150 plus 150.
Well, let's roll it over.
Yeah, then that's right. Actually, I forgot a trailing one here, but yeah.
The thing is, you still have to consider the possibility that Green Bay
Rams could win.
And I would have New Orleans 72% against the Rams, which completely changes things. And even if you think like there's only a what does the market have that even if you think there's only a 28% chance or something of the Rams winning this week, I don't even know what the number is. If it seems fairly close. 25% or something. I mean, that still is enough to affect it.
Yeah,
that got deep. I like that.
You basically need them. So if you just do like the cube root, right? You just need basically them to be like a pick 'em. I agree with you. I mean, I think that there are outcomes where New Orleans comes out looking. What if there are a bunch of games in which Green Bay plays LA and doesn't look like the best team in the NFC, but still wins. And New Orleans, let's say they do what they did to the Bucs the first 2 times and blow them out 38-3, and then is the game in Lambeau a pick 'em the following week?
And if the Saints, I mean, with Michael Thomas and Kamara back, if their offense actually looks more explosive.
Yeah, I really think that game's going to be like plus 125.
I mean, I think the rollover numbers make a lot more sense for, like, you talked about Washington last week, Rufus, on Twitter. I still think those ones make more sense for the huge underdogs, right? Because, in the other sense that you could sort of, I don't know, you could also bet them at, against the spread, right? And there are other ways to bet them that don't require them to win the Super Bowl that I think are just like more positive EV.
I completely agree. I think right now you shouldn't be betting futures. You're almost always going to be better off rolling over the money lines. I bet the future in this case because it was so far off. Like, it was the best price by, I think the best I saw anywhere else was plus 600. And so I felt like I was getting a really good price, which essentially negates the fact that normally the over-round, the hold in a futures market, a multi-way market like this, is going to be so much higher.
Plus, you can bail. Like, it's much easier to bail. You don't have to buy out of positions. The opposite side of that being, let's say they do make the Super Bowl and something bad happens to the team. You want to bail, you just bail. You have no position essentially. But the opposite would be they make the Super Bowl. Mahomes rips his knee up in the fourth quarter, the other side, and you really, that you have both tail risks, I suppose, going into that once you get down the road. But I don't know how you can really price that sort of stuff. And I didn't bet a lot. I didn't bet a lot of conference and Super Bowl futures this year. And I don't know, maybe you guys can talk me out of what I did. I felt like I had more of an advantage over just staying away from the playoffs. I mean, early in the season, I did division stuff a lot more.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I looked at it like 3 different weeks during the season, and those are the times when the bets were placed. Like, it wasn't a regular thing.
Well, there was also just a ton of uncertainty. Like, to me, the reason I bet Green Bay and Kansas City is that they depend upon way fewer things to happen. Like, if the Rams lose Donald or Ramsey or Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods or their quarterback, like, they're probably not going to win the Super Bowl. Whereas with Kansas City, it's like if they lose their quarterback, right? Like, that to me is like really the only variable that changes their likelihood to win the Super Bowl by all that much. And the same thing with Green Bay. So, like, that was really every other team. It was like, you insert uncertainty into your simulations, and it's like, oh, well, none of these prices really have all that much value. And some of the other teams that are a little weaker might pick up some, but are you really going to bet the Jets to win the Super Bowl? No, so maybe Rufus might have won.
Rufus might.
I actually didn't.
Yeah. I like that 20 weeks deep here, still making fun of that.
Right.
I do have some Rams, but obviously the position they were in when that was a mid-season, like Rams to win the NFC. I have a little when we bet this, I think the reason, and I looked at the dates, the reason we did this is when we were talking MVP. I have some Chiefs, and it was basically like a Dutch. Like I said, we're going to take half the stake and go Chiefs. We're going to go half the stake and go Mahomes MVP. Which was looking good for a little while. Thanks, Aaron. But so I have some Chiefs to win it all, and I think it's some dead Rams money as well.
That's Dutch, huh? I was like thinking, wait, that sounds like Asian too. Asian.
Yeah, it's the Asian handicap with the player in the team.
Yeah, but
that's
Eric, I think that was a really, really interesting point you made about the fragility being, one person rather than a group of people.
Yeah, I think that's been like a huge part of this whole season, right? Like, I mean, Andy Reid and Mahomes make it to the stadium, the Chiefs are favorites in every single game, no matter what. Whereas, even like the Ravens, who I think the world of, like, there's a lot of stuff that could derail them, even if Lamar is healthy. So, and Buffalo maybe a little bit less. I think Allen's, earned that like status as like kind of as the big bet you make on that team. But even then, like, we don't have all that much data on him being as brilliant as he's been over the past couple months.
Let's. I'm going to move us on to some of the games we've got coming up. We could talk about fragility and how it's going to impact teams' futures and whatnot all day long. But the first one we've got is the LA Rams at the Packers, two teams that we've just been talking about a little bit. I think this one was late to the board and it's kind of been off a bit because of injuries and whatnot. And I think, Eric, you mentioned a few players there that we'll probably talk about in a little bit as well. But it's -7 on Green Bay. It's still there. The total was put up at 56.5. It's come down to 45.5. The Rams obviously surprised a few people, and whether that's, well, it's probably a mixture of a good defense and the Seahawks offense kind of continuing that really poor decline that we've seen over the sort of tail end of the season or the second half of the season. Questions over Wolford, Goff. We had both. End of the game now. I think Goff is still cobbled together. I don't really know what's going on there. He's going to play. I think there's issues maybe with Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp. I don't know what the kind of status is on those guys as well, but it kind of boils down to a good defense trying to limit a really good offense. -7 might be a bit of a big number on Green Bay, but I'm sure it's going to tempt a lot of people. And maybe for someone who's got them in the outrights, Eric, I'll come to you first and see what you think about this matchup and where the line is.
Yeah, this is one where if you can assume some level of health out of Goff, I think the Rams are probably the right side. But because you probably can't, and given the weather in Green Bay is probably not conducive necessarily to a quarterback throwing with a broken thumb. The fact that, the Packers we talked about home field advantage last week, but the Packers have a week off. They have, a lot of Rams players, including Aaron Donald, coming off of injuries last week. To me, I think this number is probably okay. I don't think I bet either side of it. Given, again, like I said, I think most models would probably have the Rams have value here, but Green Bay, has a lot of edge case advantages here.
And Andy, someone that's on the Rams side in terms of your futures, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, they're dead. This is bad. We were just trying to guess on some of these lines, and last week we said probably the other side of 7.5, 8. We thought we'd see for a number, especially with the injuries. This is one of those, the classic NFL. You're not going to find out on these injuries. Aaron Donald's fine, and then you actually look up what his injury is, and it tells a normal person to take 6 weeks off of work. Literally torn cartilage away from the ribs. They're gonna shoot his chest
just
up.
Inject him.
Just let him play. So some of these injuries are very important in this game. And at the end of the game, especially, we didn't know the status of Goff. We didn't know the status of Kupp. We didn't know the status of Donald. Wasn't there one? Even Akers, I think, was dinged up a little towards the end of the game. Said if one or two of these guys doesn't go, 7.5 might be value, because there's some issues here. Obviously, I don't think Wolford has a shot to play based on just how bad that neck thing looked. Maybe he's feeling much better now, but there was a very goofy game. I'm glad the Rams got it done. I'd like to see the Seahawks lose, but if I just went raw numbers, I'd say bet the Rams. But I don't think I can make a case for a team where we might get to game time and realize, oh, guess what? Aaron Donald all week said he's going to play. And then they're going to realize he's going to be in a snap count. He's 1 out of 3 plays out there on defense. Kupp isn't running as many routes as we thought. And Goff's thumb is, just one. Again, it was 12 days ago he had a surgery. Yeah. It'll be 3 weeks essentially since he had surgery on that thumb. He didn't look like he was gripping it well at times. There were a few throws that floated. So
I think
it's not a great defense, but at the same time, I worry about putting too much money on a guy with a thumb that looks like that. So I make this number pretty fair, I guess. It's dipped below 7 at some places.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like a -6.75 basically. But
I like that we're going to the Asian.
Okay, so I kind of agree with what you guys are saying on the injuries. I mean, there's a like, and my number is close enough to the market. I have it at minus 6.3 that I'm going to pass. But it is interesting to me how Seattle played, or how LA played last week when Donald was out, and the pressure they were still able to get. And I think that is a difference that you see from this LA team and LA teams in previous seasons, where I thought losing Wade Phillips would be a downgrade, and the job Staley's done has been like amazing. And so you have Ramsey locked up. Do you think they'll, Eric? You probably know better than I do. Will they put Ramsey on Devontae Adams all game?
Yeah, he wasn't over Metcalf as much as you think. Like, we were actually, helping the Fox broadcast with that actual very thing the other day, and it was more like 60% of the time he was over Metcalf. So I don't think it's going to be like 100% of the time. But that being said, Green Bay doesn't have a secondary receiver like Lockett to where you actually have to care all that much. So it'll be interesting. To your point, Rufus, the Rams do such a good job. They build from the back to the front. So even though Donald is amazing, like, he's not their first priority as far as defense is concerned. Their first priority is to work on coverage, and then they sort of trust the upfront players to make plays. And to their credit, they did the other day, even without Donald being in there. So I do think we'll see some sort of shadowing. It'll probably be the best individual matchup of the whole weekend, but I don't know if it'll be 100% of the time.
And do you think that's a good matchup for Ramsey, in the sense that, like, Devontae Adams is not a guy with breakaway speed. He's a great route runner, and it seemed like Metcalf. I mean, he got by Ramsey. There's one play where he was open and Wilson didn't complete the pass, but Ramsey's not. I mean, what is he, like, a 4.45, 4.4 guy?
Yeah, Ramsey's not the most. Well, he's athletic, obviously, but he's not like I think he's more of like the instinctual type player, which I think works well against a player. Metcalf's obviously good at a lot of things, but I think he's more of a physical specimen than he is a tactician, the way that Adams is. So maybe Adams will match up a little. I mean, Adams has sort of been like matchup proof for like 2 years now. So we'll see, like, maybe the Rams punt on that. I know Belichick over the years used to put guys like Logan Ryan over Julio Jones in the Super Bowl and like double team him, and then play their best corner on, the secondary receiver, and sort of try to knock out both at one time. Maybe the Rams throw everybody for a loop and do that, and put like Darius Williams over Adams, and then play a safety over the top, and then have Ramsey shut down whoever Green Bay thinks is the secondary target.
Are we going to have to break down a Ramsey over MVS breakdown then, I suppose? That would be,
yeah. Well, which, if you can eliminate,
but the scheme, I think, is the big difference between, you talk about the Seattle having the secondary receiver. I think Green Bay's passing scheme is going to be to their advantage if you're comparing offenses there. It sucks that you don't have your secondary receiver there, but I feel like it's a smarter scheme, better sequencing at times, and hopefully they're not just forcing some of the run. Seattle just looks stupid at times. It looked like they should be able to beat this defense at times, and they just looked like they wanted no part of it. So
are we not giving the Rams credit for that? I mean,
I want to give them a lot of credit. Floyd was
looked that bad. What was he, like, 10 for 27 passing? Like, when is and you can argue that they should have thrown the ball more, and I agree, and that Wilson always takes a bunch of sacks, which is true. But I mean, I think you got to give the Rams a lot of credit there, and it'll be very interesting to see what they scheme up against Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, that's why I hated Seattle's scheme. It felt like, in what world should Wilson be holding the ball this long? We're taking these 9-yard sacks all the time. Like, this is not the team to do this against. What are you guys doing?
But that's what Wilson is. Like, he's someone that prolongs plays. Like, I don't think he's the quarterback that you have doing 3-step drops and like. Yeah, he's best when he's sort of playing outside the confines of the normal offense, right?
Well, but I think, like, the thing that Seattle has failed at is making the gimme plays positive EV anymore, right? So before it was like run, pray that Russell Wilson makes great plays in third down, and he does it enough where, like, they do fine. And then at the beginning of the year, it was throw, make sure that, give Russell Wilson a chance on third down. And interestingly, they had some noise there, but the early down throws were really efficient and their offense was humming. Obviously, Andy was saying like, okay, there's the worst thing that could ever happen to Tomlin was to punt and have it be, positive reinforcement. The worst thing that happened to the Seahawks, in my estimation, was going 7-1 down the stretch, despite sort of bleeding efficiency from their offense. Because again, like to me, it's never about the off script plays for Wilson. It's about making sure the on script plays have some efficiency. And unfortunately, I think Seattle sort of like always gravitates towards the inefficient on script plays.
I think it's quite interesting that last week we talked a little bit about Sean McVay and kind of the genius running out towards the end of the season. And obviously I think he was quite influential in getting the job done against the Seahawks. Do you kind of begin to consider or kind of think more about that and how maybe he's not a bad playoff coach or late season coach that people might think?
Yeah, I think he deserves a great deal of credit for this season in general. I don't know if I'd put the offense on him this last week more than just, they had some great individual performances by Cam Akers. And some luck. Obviously, they had an interception return for a touchdown.
They had a screen on a screen. Eric.
They had the fumble punt, right, that turned that game from a 10-point game to a 17-point game. So like I think McVay at worst is earning like a neutral, playoff grade from me, I would say. But like I don't know, I'd have to go back and look. I don't know if I'm like all that impressed with that game specifically, but he didn't like play so poorly that they got shut down, which is of course good.
All right, well let's move on to our next one, and we've got next on our list is Baltimore Ravens at the Buffalo Bills, and a minimal movement on this. The total was up at 50, or it's at 50. Sorry, it opened at 49. Buffalo the favourites -2.5, and the bettors they're pretty much splitting them straight down the middle at the moment. A lot of what we talked about last week with Baltimore specifically was the way they've played this season, or the way they've been forced to play this season, was kind of a bit different to what we saw last year, and the Lamar run game. And obviously we had one pretty impressive play that put that to bed a little bit. And we saw the Lamar playoff narrative also disappear. Bills, I think, will probably disappoint a lot of bettors. Got the win, didn't get the cover. I think it's going to be interesting this week in terms of the activity on the market to see if people turn against them quickly after a really good season as a whole, and certainly end to the season as well. It's going to be close here. It could maybe get to the 3. It could maybe go completely the other way to the Ravens. But what do you think, Rufus?
So I lean Baltimore here. This is an interesting one in that using Massey Peabody with a prior makes the game first off, then I have to figure out what I'm doing for home field advantage here. Buffalo's going to have some fans in the stands. So I actually am giving them what would be sort of 60% of the normal home field advantage in this, with the geography, et cetera, with all the other stuff I include in there. And the unfamiliarity is in this particular case. But I would make it Buffalo -0.2 of a point. So basically a pick 'em with the prior, because that boosts Baltimore. But based on this season alone, I have it Buffalo -1.9. So regardless, I'm directionally the same. It would need to get to 3 to really take the side there. But I think teasing, it's obviously the basic strategy. Wong teaser leg is fantastic there if you have something to tease it with.
And Andy, what about yourself?
Yeah, I do have an open teaser. This might be it. 2.5 feels pretty good. Total's a little high for that sort of thing, but I think this total's a little high anyway. And totals are just high. Like if you still want to play Wong teasers, you're not going to get totals at 40 anymore. They're few and far between this year. I lean Baltimore as well. This is another one. When we said what should these lines be, I said this would be a pick. I thought this would be a lot closer. I guess there's not a ton of, some of these people are hanging a real juicy 1 or a 2. It's not like there's some huge value on the 1 and the 2. It's not that far off. It is the 3rd straight road game for Baltimore. You can take away week 17 was Cincinnati. It was a cake game. They won. I think they only gave up 3 points. That's not a huge travel spot. None of these are like, you're not going to the West Coast. You're not going out to Denver or any for these games. It's Cincinnati, Tennessee, Buffalo, but it's still another road game. There's a little signal there, but if you go look at some of those signals, and my podcast partner Drew pointed out, like if you take the small sample size of teams that have had to do a third straight road game, there's some nasty ones in there where it's like the Chargers popping across to a few teams, and then their third game was like to New England. That's much different than Baltimore to Buffalo, especially when week 17 was just it wasn't a formality. They needed that win over Cincy, but even with all that, I probably see some value on Baltimore here, and I will obviously be cheering for Baltimore for Calcutta reasons.
I think we could.
Drew was in a bad place when it was 10-0.
Is that your team? Do you have the Ravens for the Calcutta?
That was when it was 10-0. You get the DM for the text saying, "At what point did we cheer for this team to lose by the most?" I'm like, come on! It's like the halftime shows. If they would have been down 10-0 and a half, there would not have been a halftime show. It'd have been just canceled until morale improves.
And I think we could be on for a full house here, Eric. I know you like Baltimore. Do you like them enough at 2.5?
I actually, this is one I disagree with everybody on, I guess. I like Buffalo here. The reasons I like the Ravens are almost all reflected in the reasons I like Buffalo, in that both teams use all 4 downs. Both teams are, very smart analytically, very good franchises. Buffalo, I think, has a little bit more of a sustainable way of winning on offense, which is throwing the football to really good receivers. And while I think the Ravens have a good defense, I don't think that they're perfect there. I don't think that they're a great pass rush. And Buffalo's defense does a really good job, and they did it against Indianapolis, of enticing teams to run the football, being enough of a speed bump, getting teams into late downs. And to Phillip Rivers' credit, he converted a lot of them last week. But if you look at, the way in which, obviously Baltimore wants to win, it's running the football on early downs, avoiding third down. And I think Buffalo's good enough on defense to force enough third downs where Lamar Jackson, some of his deficiencies throwing the football are highlighted a little bit. And so this is one where I disagree, but obviously I think both of these teams are great. I wouldn't be surprised if either team won, but I'm going to lean a little bit. I like Buffalo minus whatever it is. It was 1.5 one time, minus 2.5. I think I make it more like 3.5.
All right, then. Well, let's get on to our next one. Cleveland Browns at the Kansas City Chiefs, and we're into the divisional round with a double-digit handicap, thanks to the Browns and their defense and a weird first quarter against Pittsburgh. It is 10.5 on the Chiefs, a really hefty total as well at 56. A lot of people are going to say the Chiefs will win, that they won't cover. Does anyone think that won't be the case, or does anyone want to be brave and maybe make a case for the Browns? What are we thinking on this one?
The question is, and I'm asking everyone, how much value can you place on their home field plus the bye? Because this is the same line you could get with Atlanta, 3-4 weeks ago. It's the same line as the Falcons. Is that what we're saying? That's where it just there is a premium, but there should be a premium on a team that just scored that many points as well. You'd think so.
Yeah, I'm the Falcons.
They scored that. They had 5. They got 5 turnovers.
Yeah, I know. But I just feel like there's always.
But Atlanta. Are the Falcons worse than the Browns? Is a really good question, because the Falcons, I think, had a better point differential this year than the Browns did.
Yeah.
Yep.
And again, I'm not saying Baker Mayfield since week 7 has been the 3rd highest graded quarterback in our system. So I'm more of a believer than most, but Atlanta was outscored by their opponents by about a point per game this year. And a lot of that was losing the final week by 17 points. Whereas Cleveland, I think, was Cleveland was similar in the regular season this year. just to sort of look that up. Cleveland
they
was
were 8-3 and had a negative point differential still when
they
they
were
were
minus
like
11. They were minus 11 in point differential, despite the fact that they won, a bunch of their games after the week 7 I was talking about. So to me, I think that's an apt comparison. The thing that I have a hard time shaking in this game, and part of it's probably because I've watched Kansas City for a long time, but like the Browns defense was almost no resistance for Pittsburgh last week. Even the interceptions that were made and the plays that were made were almost all Pittsburgh errors as opposed to brilliance by Cleveland. If that's the case on Sunday, I really wonder about Cleveland's viability in the game, long term.
That's where I think I might be looking more at a total. Like we talked, and I almost completely convinced myself it's just way too many points. And the more I think about it, I don't think there's some scenario here where this is just some low scoring game and that's why they stay in it. I think if Cleveland is covering or near covering, they score. They score on this defense. Baker, I'm with you there. I was not in the middle of the season. I'd have been like, yeah, Browns, Falcons, pretty close. But I have been impressed with just what we've done on the offense, what Stefanski's done. Alex Van Pelt did last week, I guess. But what we've seen from the offense latter parts of the season, and yeah, the defense did kind of stink at times, even though you saw them up 28-0 or whatnot. It was tipped passes. It was Ben throwing a couple really horrific balls right at some people. I mean, just absolute gifts. So I don't think you see that from Mahomes. So I might have talked myself into an over the more I thought about this game.
Well, I think you'd have people out there.
I don't care where it's 56. It's huge, but
what I want to know is this the kind of game where Andy Reid is going to is going to put out the A game plan, or is he going to throw out the D- one where do what he's got to do to get by?
It will go on for another week, and now that they got the Browns, not the Steelers.
I think having fallen behind 24-0 to Houston last year in the first round, the other thing is every single playoff game last year, they were 3-and-out on their first drive. I think, look, I don't know. I mean, I'm just spitballing here. But if I were coaching Kansas City, my focus over the bye would be getting off to a big start.
I think what you're going to see is Andy Reid hire Adam Gase to be his first quarter controller. Didn't the Jets scored on they scored on their first possession every single game the first 16 weeks or 15 weeks of the season or something like that?
Yes.
Did you all know that? I saw that during a Jets telecast.
I don't think everyone pays as much attention to the Jets as you do, Rufus.
Actually, it wasn't the Jets. It was Red Zone.
I think Andy raised an interesting point there when you look at the points that Cleveland put on the board, and then to Rufus's point as well, you got to look into how those points came about, I guess. And this is probably the best game to think about it when we talk about overreactions to one game and the fact that it's going to be more prevalent in the playoffs. Do you think that's something that can potentially be taken advantage of, or are we still in a situation where the market is efficient enough, and as much as people might overreact to the Browns, it's still going to even itself out? How do you approach that?
Well, I think that I don't think anybody's overreacting to the Browns though, right? I guess I wasn't looking at all the marketplaces, but when this game first opened, it was 7.5, right? And then it got bet up to 10. So I feel like people are sufficiently skeptical of Cleveland, and does that mean that maybe there's some value on them? I don't know. This one's tough for me, even as a Kansas City fan. I don't think I'm going to bet this game.
And Rufus, what you mentioned the Andy Reid A game. What does the Andy Reid A game look like? Does it look like a cover at 10.5? Does it look like a complete blowout at sort of 20+ points? What are we talking?
I mean, I think the Andy Reid game is a cover if he brings his A game, it's a cover at 10. I mean, so I make the number 10.8 using priors. If I just go with the in-season number without priors, it's 7.5 based on how the teams have played this season. But at the same time, without a prior, I'm also not getting sort of the extreme. I'm not getting enough dispersion in my ratings.
I mean, the Chiefs haven't played a high leverage football game since week 3 3 with the
Ravens game.
Ravens, maybe the Bills game on that Monday night, which was like week 7 or something like that. Like it's tough. This is where I think football being a small sample game is so immense, right? Because I gravitate towards the idea that last year in the playoffs, they had 10-point deficits in every game and won every game by 10 or more. But then I look at this season and I try to take from it, okay, they had a really tough schedule and they won all but one of their games really, but they didn't cover, what is ultimately like an arbitrary number, which is the point spread, in their last 8 games. Like they were 0-7-1 against the number the last 8 games. So I think this is why modeling is so important, right? Because you need to be able, because I don't necessarily know if like we're able to spin all the variables the proper way in our own brains here.
Well, and I think if you look at the Chiefs this year and how they've actually played, like I think my no prior number is higher no prior number is higher for the Bills than it is for the Chiefs this year.
Yeah.
Oh, it's higher for the Packers than it is for the Chiefs, and it's higher for the Saints. So they haven't. I mean, they've been winning, but they haven't been doing it in a way that sort of comes across in my numbers, which I think largely. I mean, they've been doing well on higher leverage plays. They've been winning closer games. They've been doing well on third down. It does seem like though they have a gear they can kick into when they need to, and that isn't the case for these other teams.
Well, and the cover streak, it deserves some the non-cover streak deserves some context. Like 2 teams that are still in this playoffs in the Saints and the Buccaneers, they covered versus those teams essentially. Yeah. Like those got backdoored by, they weren't completely meaningless touchdowns, but low leverage touchdowns to get inside or onto the number against 2 teams that are left in the final 8. And both of those games were on the road, I believe. So, I mean, the cover streak, there's a lot of variance at the end of the game.
The question is, so I de-weight, I've predictive weights for each play based on, so it de-weights the lower leverage garbage time plays in a continuous function. But at the same time, I feel like there's certain teams maybe where you want to de-weight a little more and others where you might want to de-weight a little less. And it seems like in this particular case, I mean, the Chiefs are a team that I think maybe on the side where, based on the situation, you want to sort of de-weight those a little less and maybe weight the more important plays a little more. I mean, this is just me talking out of my ass right now, though.
All right, let's get on to our final game. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. And again, I mean, it goes without saying, it's another good matchup, another close one according to the market. We've had a little bit of movement on New Orleans initially. They opened up at -3.5. They're down to the 3. And the total's also been pushed up 50 to 52. It's going to be billed as Brady against Breeze. We know there's going to be much more to it than that. And I guess the Tampa Bay sort of narrative or story is that they've been playing better, a good performance from them at the weekend. Saints have got all their pieces back together and really kind of fully fit. They covered pretty easily against the Bears, but it didn't seem all too convincing, or maybe as convincing as people would have hoped. But one, I guess, for Rufus to kick us off here, liability in the outright. What is it? Just straight up money line?
So first off, I want to know, this has to be the game with the oldest combined age of starting quarterbacks.
I'm sure Eric knows.
Someone will tweet this. There'll be like a YA Tittle versus, Bobby Lane game from
Warren Moon never played in the playoffs after age 38. So you're probably right. Like that's the one that comes to my mind as old quarterbacks. But yeah, this one's the oldest, I would assume.
Besides Brady Breeze, have there been any other games where both quarterbacks are over 40? I feel like it's got to be so rare.
Yeah. Well, because Favre versus Breeze was 10 years ago, right? And Favre was in the 30, was in his 40s, but Breeze was obviously 10 years younger.
Exactly.
So yeah, this one's well, yeah, and Manning wasn't that old when he retired, so any matchup he had with Brady at the end there was probably nowhere close to this.
Yeah.
We've gone from fragility of futures to combined age of quarterbacks in one podcast.
I'm looking at George Blanda games right now, you guys.
Man, yeah.
Well, so this game I feel like is if you just grade the talent on the two teams, I think Tampa Bay should be the side. But I think that New Orleans laps them a little bit on things like coaching and depth and then that kind of thing. Like that to me is where I look. I think New Orleans has a really stable team. Like they're really good. They have two lines on defense that they can go to. Hendrickson, who has like 15 sacks, was out against the Bears, and they just bring up some guy who is almost equally effective in the first round against the Bears. In the secondary, I think they have 8 starting caliber players. At linebacker, they lose Quan Alexander, and they're fine. To me, or as Tampa Bay is maybe a little bit worse, like they have a little bit more weaknesses on defense, and I'm just not sure. Like, I think what's happened over the past like 6 weeks or so, Brady's been the highest graded quarterback by us. I think that it's been less of Arians and more of Brady. Does Arians, who we know in the Super Bowl between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Green Bay Packers in 2010, like changed his game plan fundamentally to try to get Big Ben more of a Hall of Fame credential? Like, does he like go rogue in this game and like turn them away from what's been working?
I mean, it's a good question. Arians is the guy that I think I mentioned this last week that tends to do the worst against the better teams, relative to normal, and do the best against the worst teams. And so that doesn't bode well for them here. I was looking at New Orleans, and I was kind of trying to find out why I actually have them rated so high this season. And I know play success is a big part of it, the fact that they actually are good at staying on schedule. But I found they have they're negative 458 in penalty yard differential. Well, or should I say they have been penalized 458 more yards than their opponents. That's worse than the NFL. You know who's best in the NFL? Tampa. Plus 301. That's 759. My math's right. 759 yards in penalties that separate these two teams. That's a lot, and I think you can argue that some of that is skill, but the majority of that is going to be I should say not predictive. So it's not luck, but it just isn't really that predictive going forward.
At the beginning of the season, it was almost half that number was in the first like 3-4 games of the year, right? And everybody was wondering what was so wrong about them. And I think you were leading the charge and saying, well, nothing. Like if they get better calls from the referees, then we're probably, or they get like the league average calls from the referees, you're probably fine. And that's really what materialized. Right. Since the beginning of the season, they lost a game where Taysom Hill was playing, and they lost a game to Kansas City in the first game Breeze returned. But other than that, they've not only won a lot of games, but they covered a lot of games. And they're a very impressive football team. I think the betting markets are down on them because they're not as flashy. Like they're hard to watch on offense, but they're not. That doesn't make them ineffective.
Yeah. So on defense, the first 7 weeks of the season, they gave up a success rate of 46% on first and second down. Since then, 46.3%. That's basically been the same. But on third down, the first 7 weeks of the season, they were giving up a 53% success rate. On third and fourth down, I should say. That's been 31% since. So that has been they were very unfortunate on sort of these higher leverage downs early in the season, and that has since gone the other direction and been much more in line with the defense they are.
Do you think the first two matchups shade this number at all? We were discussing that earlier. Like,
which way?
That's what I'm saying. Like, according to my numbers, I don't really think so. But do you think they shade it at all? Especially one being just such a. I mean, it was a trouncing, but it was an odd game. When somebody trounces someone so early in a game, the whole rest of the script is that game's hard to use.
It's like Cleveland-Pittsburgh almost.
Yeah, exactly. Like how do you evaluate the game?
Yeah. I don't know. So I actually just queried yesterday. I was curious, and this could be wrong. I was just, but just in my database, like teams that have won twice in the regular season and met in the playoffs, and they went 6-4 in the playoffs. And I was like, oh well, what was the average spread? The average spread, they were like only a 2.5 point favorite on average.
Yeah.
I might have, I just was command line querying. I might have mistyped, but not a lot of sample to go off of there. So, yeah.
That's a fun one for the media, though. It's hard to beat a team 3 times, Rufus.
I think it's hard to beat a team once. I think the thing that should be really like we should normalize saying it's hard to beat a team once. like at all.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. That could be the 2021 model.
Yeah, it's hard to win a playoff game in the NFL. It's probably the best way to say it.
Right, so we've got Eric into Tampa Bay on our last game. Rufus seemingly towards the Saints. Andy, you can close us out. Which side would you be taking on this one, or have you taken a side?
I wanted to lean Tampa, but I need to look a little more at. I have been impressed. This was something I railed on all season. Early season was, and Rufus's numbers are fleshing that out. I was just so mad at how good I felt that the New Orleans defense could be. Not like a great defense, not some top 3 defense, but they could be a good defense. And it just, the numbers weren't there. It was never there. The results were never there. So the fact that they have played up, I don't know if they brought Quan in at one point, but it's not like they made massive changes. It's just, I don't know if it was bad variance on third downs or who they played or just some of the play calling. So I'm pretty much on market with this one. I wanted to lean Tampa early, but I'm looking at some matchups. I'm just hoping this one's good because
I think what's cool about the playoffs this year is if chalk holds for Kansas City and Green Bay, both championship games will be really good because I think whoever comes out of Baltimore, Buffalo will be a good side, and I think whoever comes out of this game will be a good side. So that to me is a real fun development. Unlike like last year, like Chiefs Titans, come on, like that, and even like I feel like the Packers were not up to the task against San Francisco. Whereas I think I don't know what would you guys make the spread Kansas City against either Buffalo or Baltimore?
Ooh. What are you using for home field there? That's the real question.
Yeah, it's still no fans from KC ever, right?
No. Kansas City's had 10,000 or so fans every game this year.
Yeah.
So I make it like 1.5.
You make home field advantage 1 or 1.5.
1 or 1.5, I would say, if fans are there. But like again, we're all just sort of
guessing.
Guessing.
1.52 this week.
Yeah. So I would. I think we're inflated on Kansas City, but I think against either team, I'd probably make it 4.5.
I'm just gonna. And again, like I don't have a big difference between. Like I said, I think Baltimore Buffalo should be more close to a pick. So yeah, I'm about at 4 for looking at just where I rank these teams in general. And if you give them a point, I guess. So I have Kansas City, like 3.6 better than Buffalo. And Baltimore's right there too. So either way, and you're right. Either way, it should be a pretty good game. And if we get Green Bay against essentially whichever way that NFC South game goes, it should be a good game there too.
Yep.
We just can't have the Rams or Browns do something.
Right, let's call it a day there. The games are dwindling, but we still managed to run over an hour. We'll obviously be back next week to talk more football when we get onto those games. But Eric, Andy, and Rufus, thank you very much for joining me again, and thank you to everyone for listening. All of the odds are available on pinnacle.com. Good luck with your bets, and remember,